Welcome back, everyone. This is Gerald Clark with Seven Planet Broadcasting, and it's my distinct pleasure once again to have a regular on the show who I see as part of this show now is my very good friend, Julian Polzin. Say hey to everybody, Julian.
Hi, guys. As always, the label is psychotherapist and Zen teacher, and we see how much we can expand this today.
Yeah, it's really actually just as a question. I'm curious. How many of the peers that you went to school with still see you as a valid psychotherapist, and the ones that were traditional? And how many of them kind of are more over in your camp now? I mean, what's going on with that? Did you rock any boats by not going the traditional route as a psychotherapist?
Well, I think that this is something. First of all, I'm not concerned with that. Right? I don't divert my energies. Yeah. If I would be concerned with public opinion, I would split myself in two. But there's a distinct way I'm going, and my energy is pulling me there. So why, in a sense, splatter it all over the place? Why scatter it, right?
Well, I guess what I'm saying is you didn't walk a traditional route. How many people are taking note of that and possibly their path being influenced by what you're doing? Maybe that's a better way to ask it.
Well, so far as I'm experiencing it, those who, let's say, grew up with me or know me since school or early childhood, they have a certain idea of who I am in their head. It's just kind of like, let's say your father or your mother knows you since being a child. They have a certain narrative or story in their head of who you are. So, for example, if you think about the story of the Buddha, yeah, and you think about how his father, the emperor, wanted him to become a great emperor. Of course, he didn't see his son as something else as he wanted to see him, right? So in that sense, people struggle tremendously, like when they have a concept of someone, an idea of someone, to abandon that concept and not to act from memory. So as such, to them, I'm probably just Julian.
Yeah.
That's it, right? And it's completely fine. Because there is no need to convince anyone of anything. All is well, ultimately. Right?
Is your practice going well?
It's pretty busy these days because now I've been starting to build a meditation school. So in a sense, with writing, now doing podcasts with you, doing psychotherapy, teaching meditation, it's pretty busy, but it's very joyful. Because sharing those techniques and see how people become passionate about it, start practicing, and they have their little discoveries and the mysteries, and then they become excited and curious just to watch the process. Yeah, when people start, for example, embracing their shadow, working out their karmic energies, their memories, and when they come into a state of love and creativity, and you just see suddenly they don't need assistance in any way. Yeah, they become energy running itself. You just watch it like you watch I don't know, trees grow, flowers grow.
Yeah. In a way, it's as a healer, being in a holistic healthcare practice for many years, I can identify with what you're saying. And in a way, you feel like if you could be any part in allowing them to experience the full expression of their path so that they get to the farthest place they could get, if you could empower them in some ways, they could overcome some fear or obstacle to become more of who they were supposed to be. I don't know if there's anything more empathic or compassionate you can do for humanity than that, even whatever service capacity you do it within, because that's what we're all here doing, right? Pretty much.
It's in a sense about sharing, because we experience ourselves through relationship. That's tremendously important. It's like when we want to step out of the ego, when we start sharing, when we start loving, any act that goes into this direction, we develop a sense of compassion. The borders between the idea of me and you, they start blurring. They become transparent at a certain point through, let's say, Zen practice, yoga practice, assisting people to heal. We get more and more intimate with our environment and the beings that we meet, We start feeling them on a deeper level. The connections grow stronger. And as such, suddenly, when you start feeling the feelings of others, for example, yeah, this equally, in a sense, helps you go beyond the concept of ego, because if I can feel the emotion of someone, in that sense, my self-concept cannot survive. You just realize, well, my awareness can be in my body, it can be in someone else's body, it can be anywhere. My awareness can travel here, travel there, and then I realize it's not my awareness, it's just awareness. It's everyone's awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And once you realize, when you assist someone, that you're actually always assisting yourself, because everyone else is you.
Yeah. Hey, speaking of that,
that's the joy.
You're talking about some new ideas. Speaking, and you've recently updated your book. Why don't you tell us about the name of your book and the new changes you've added, just so people know, and maybe when either it's going to be available in PDF if it's not already, or if it's going to be in print form. So go ahead and talk about Laughing God Behind the Mask and what new additions you've added to it and where they can get it.
Well, I have it published on Amazon. Yeah, so the full title is Beyond Psychotherapy, The Laughing God Behind the Masks. And at first, and that's the beauty of it, it started out that let's say, through my psychotherapy practice, I learned after a while, when practicing Zen, that I start transcending regular psychotherapy practice, that I went beyond beliefs, systems, methods, but something else was arising. Well, in this process, there is an evolution, in a sense, consciousness. And at a certain point, when I went into past life memory, there were a lot of things that I processed, that I tried to integrate. And from the level of person, from the level of ego, from the level of Julian, I was not as of yet really comfortable speaking about it in public. Yeah, because at the time,
I remember that actually when I first met you, I found it interesting, but also just a stage of where you were on your path, that there were certain things in your life that you felt were still private, even though they were part of your spiritual path. So go ahead.
Right. So at a certain point, I just realized that constantly I'm thinking about writing about past life memory. Okay? And at first I thought, well, I don't want to fall in an ego trap. If I write about past life memory, yeah, it might be, let's say, something on the level of ego that wants attention, that wants to be appreciated. Yeah. And I was in resistance to it, and I kept resisting it, but I realized at a certain point it was my deeper self that wanted me to speak out about it. So it was about embracing who I am on a deeper level. And I do understand that the things I might say, for many, might sound rather fantastic, might sound difficult to integrate. Yeah, if someone has any sort of belief system, they will struggle to integrate what I might be saying, yeah, later in the show. Well, something helped, because I told you that I had memory of being a Soto Zen teacher, but I didn't say which teacher that was. At least I didn't say it in public. Yeah, I just said a teacher, because then I didn't have to say a name, and as such, I would relieve myself from the resonance or the feedback that would come from the public. But the thing is, I've reached out to the Soto Zen Association, and I have been talking to someone there, and I realized that it is possible to speak about it, and I will, in that sense, make contact with the Soto Zen family, yeah, soon, in order to, let's say, speak about those past life memories and see what develops from there, not having any expectation, but being open for the journey. But I realized that, let's say, that certain fears that I had about speaking about it were not true, because when I started speaking about it, people were actually interested. They were open to it, and these conversations were very engaging, very open, loving. So as such, even though for the general public, making certain statements, and I will make a statement about being a certain historical figure, For some, they will have trouble integrating it because they will see it from a certain perspective of their own self-concept. When we see a motivation within ourselves, why we would do something, for example, for fame, for money, for attention, or whatever, we start projecting it. So I make this very clear. This is not about attention. This is not about money. This is about sharing what's out there. This is about sharing the possibilities of consciousness. So I will say what this friend of mine from the Soto Zen Association told me. She said, Julian, be aware people will see you as bigger than you are or as smaller than you are. They will not see you as you are. Well, so I want to encourage those who are listening to try to see me beyond beliefs. And when they see me beyond beliefs, they will see themselves clearly.
You know, I have to say as a caveat that even though this is, when it's happening to you, it seems absolutely phantasmagorical. This can't really be possible, that I had a past life and I might have been someone else. But look at what goes on in the with the Dalai Lama's group in the Tibetan Buddhists. They have a tradition where reincarnated masters keep showing up over and over, and I mean, hundreds of them. Okay, so this is a normal thing for them. And I also read in the Lost Teachings of Atlantis, they have the same exact issue going on. Their students almost always land all over the world instead of in regions like they do with the Tibetan Buddhists. And then they end up in the school by the time they're 21, reclaiming the position they held way back some time before. So there's this recurrent, well, I don't think that's that unusual, but it took you a while to wrap your arms around it, didn't it? Because I know we've been talking about this since I met you. I know.
Right. Well, the reason is responsibility. Because with my past comes a certain responsibility. With the things I know comes a certain responsibility. And I wrote in my book, and I mean it as I say it, there's a chapter where I speak about who I was, and this chapter is called A Name as Heavy as a Mountain and as Light as a Cloud. Because to the spirit, it's liberating. To the person or to the ego, it feels heavy. But I do not intend to escape myself. I'm not here to do this. I am here to assist people in showing that we do not need to escape ourselves, that we can embrace ourselves. And in that sense, to make it clear that I went full circle. So the Soto Zen school was founded by me. 700 years ago, my name was Dogen Zenji. And now I'm reconnecting with the school that I then founded, seeing that all is well, that the teaching is preserved well, that there are many loving and caring teachers who are very sensitive with the mystical matters. And one of those teachers has talked to me about those past life experiences and the mystical phenomena that I was going through. For example, that I would meet masters in not physical form that would visit me and talk to me and share information with me. She would say she also would have contact with Tibetan masters, living Tibetan masters, and she would say they go through the same thing that you're going through. She said when those Tibetan lamas start awakening, they like you, they go through these experiences, they suddenly remember techniques, they have access to information where their personality says, I cannot know this. Where does this come from? This is my identity. I'm born here. This is my name. This is my age. This is my job. But then you find out when you go into meditation that you start downloading from a memory bank that is far greater than your current personality, your current localized memory that is trapped in time and thinks of itself as I. So you find out I, in that sense, is just an idea, because there are levels to I. If consciousness would be a pyramid, the tip of it thinks of itself as a person, but the tip can be aware of, let's say, the bottom of the pyramid, or the bottom of the pyramid can be aware of the tip and of everything between. So there are layers of consciousness. So when we say I, there's always the question, to what level of I do I refer? right? So I understand, for example, Julian, the person, and the spiritual being that I am, we are a unit. Yeah, that there's, in a sense, the person is communicating with spirit in meditation telepathically, right? And there are dialogues going on, exchanging information. And a lot of this is loving, very kind, caring, and so familiar. Right? And this is what people feel when they experience deja vu. Many do not understand it because on a soul level, they know that there's a pattern that they have experienced before. They know that there's something to be learned, but the ego says this is strange, this is alien. Yeah. So in that sense,
I had a question if you want right there. So,
all right.
To what extent do you think lessons we didn't get in a past life are the reason we get focused on this past life regression, so that we could go, oh, I didn't get that lesson then, and I'm supposed to get it. And if I can resolve that in this life, then maybe I'll get farther than I was in that past incarnation. Could that have something to do with why? Because I think, I like you, I don't think focusing too heavily on your past life, it could take you out of the now, and you could misidentify yourself and have an ego trip and all this, and in my second book, I had the same experience you're talking about, and I still haven't actually come out and said who I felt like I was in a past life, but I've used it as a guiding principle, looking at things. And so it wasn't important to me, but if it's a no name, then it's okay, you can say it. But if it's a well-known name, then you're ego tripping, right? Because you had to be important in a past life. You couldn't have been just some schmuck that was not important, right? See what I mean?
Yes, that is the fear. That is the fear. But the interesting thing about that fear can be ego. Because you can be afraid of rejection. You can be afraid of speaking out. Yeah, because there is a fear of being labeled egoistic, of being labeled selfish, of being labeled, for example, narcissistic or attention seeking, if we actually do speak out about who we were. So this is why I try to restrain it, why I try to hold it back, because I was thinking maybe there might be an egoic desire within me to say this, but actually my ego tried to keep this secret. So my ego was in resistance to opening up, to speaking.
I had the exact same issue, probably because I saw everybody thinking they had a walk-in experience from some other entity, that they were this and they were that, and next thing you know, there's 5 Enkis, 13 Isises, and 12 Marduks in the same room. I'm the one incarnating that one. So anyway, I actually did a video on this personality crisis relative to dealing with the archetypes and thinking, are we that one? Are we this one? Which one are we? So.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is when people start waking up, and for example, there is a certain danger, not ultimately, but relatively, there's a certain danger with practicing Kundalini yoga. And the danger with this is, if you're not practiced in mindful meditation, if you're not practiced in Zazen, for example, for a long time, when you deal with those strong energies, our egos have a tendency to draw identity from experience. So we experience something and we say, I'm this. And the danger is when we start Kundalini yoga and those very intense past life memories are reoccurring, that our ego suddenly wants to identify with this and create a new form of ego, right? So while I was in this integration process, I didn't want to speak about it for the very simple reason, because I wasn't sure. Yeah, I needed to go through the process to understand if me speaking about it was an egoic motivation or not. Because the thing is, when we draw identity for mystical experience, this is psychosis. This is what happens to people. You cannot go through certain gates with the ego still present, because when you do that, psychosis is what happens.
Wow. You know what? That is a very profound thing you just said right there. But because I think you can get up to a certain gate, and if there's certain lessons you have to learn at each of your chakra gates, right? Typically, and this is what's wrote this out in a table. This one controls this one, and these are the lessons you got to get, and here's the attributes of that energy. But if you get up against in general, if you get up against a lesson and you're resisting it, it persists. It keeps coming back to you, right? So right at the point where if you keep resisting it and you're at the gate, I used to say you get thrown back into the hot boiling oil of transformation until you get that lesson, because you don't go through the gate until you got it. It's just set up that way. Right. And part of that is subjugation of the ego and purification of your consciousness. These are alchemical principles as well. And speaking of that, I just want people to know we have some questions from the last show, and I'll keep those toward the end. So if we get to the place where you're done talking and just want to answer a few of these real quick, we'll cue that up, okay?
Yeah, there's something that you said right now that is very profound, because this is something that I notice when I teach meditation, is that when people start practicing Zazen and they start watching their breath, of course, there are certain thought patterns that are occurring, but they do not understand why they are occurring. Well, when you start practicing meditation, you are attempting to step through a door. It means you try to step into the next level of consciousness, right? So the interesting thing is there is, in a sense, a natural law, and we used to call them gods. These are, let's say, consciousnesses or intelligence that, in a sense, rule over certain levels of dimensions. And when you start meditating, you try to go through a certain door, for example, to reach another level of awareness. But the moment you try to step through the door, everything that stops you from stepping through that door is a reoccurring pattern. So there's a guardian that says, okay, you're trying to step through, but you can't step through with this. And then suddenly there's a pattern in your family, and it keeps repeating in your mind, it keeps repeating in your mind, because the guardian is friendly, always lets you know, you can't step through. Out of compassion, I'm not letting you step through, because you're not ready for that. With that baggage, you cannot. So then in meditation, so this investigation, we find out, I have attachment here, I have attachment there. This keeps me from reaching a certain energy frequency. So I could break out from a threshold. I could break through that threshold. So that threshold is saying, no, revisit this. Please revisit this. Please revisit that. Right?
That's exactly what happens. It starts coming to you through different scenarios, different people, different vignettes, but it's the same lesson. That's just how, it's a universal principle, actually.
Yes.
If you're resisting, it will persist and keep showing up. And I know, I like you probably know lots of people that you can look in from their lives from the outside, because you have a detached perspective, and being a therapist, you probably do this all the time. You can see the pattern of the lesson in the repetitions and the vignettes that keep showing up in their lives, because they'll sit there and tell you about it, but they don't see the connection oftentimes.
Right. This is something that you also find in Zen Buddhism. In Zen Buddhism, this is the simple statement: no inside, no outside. Right. So we see a manifestation outside, and it causes a certain pain because we have a bias towards us. We say this is good or this is bad. If we say this is bad, we generate an emotion that we can call pain. But we call it bad because we think it's external, and we are a victim to it, when in truth there is something within your consciousness, deeply hidden, a shadow, that we are unaware of. And this is memory, often karmic memory from past lives, but often also present life trauma. This present life trauma or karmic energy vibrates at a certain frequency corresponding with those events that you call external. Yeah,
that's right.
Carl Gustav Jung gave the best description for karma that I've heard so far. Yeah, and I think I said it on the show before, but I can say it again. Yeah, if we do not make the unconscious conscious, it will control our life, and we will call it fate. And Jung emphasized shadow integration. And integrating the shadow means basically all the parts of you that you are rejecting, that you're in resistance to. And since we don't like to admit that, the ego, through a mechanism of guilt and shame, keeps us from looking into the shadow. So we don't admit that there is a shadow, that there are parts of us that we cannot integrate. Then we project them outwards. We say the evil is outside. Right? So we start then attracting experiences, manifestations that are actually caused by our energy signature. That means our combined memories, and within it are past life memories. So when we start practicing Kundalini yoga, yeah, and do then shadow work by using the third eye to scan our bodies, we can, in a sense, find pain in the body, blockages. And when we observe it with the third eye, we get a holographic memory of those events. These are often past life events. Once we can integrate them, our energy signature changes and we stop manifesting this in our life. It doesn't happen anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
this is a conscious way of handling karma,
yeah,
which we could also call alchemy.
Yeah, exactly. It is all alchemy, isn't it? It's a transformation from lead into gold, or a hairy barbarian into the light, if you want to use Thoth words, right? So, but it is. Yeah. It absolutely is. And you know, and to be fair, it may not happen in one lifetime. It may not happen in 10 lifetimes. You may not get to the place where you're ready to be awoken from your illusion for 100 lifetimes. And so the idea that we've only had one past life, I want to put to rest, because I think as eternal conscious beings, I think we've had experiences not only on this planet, but who knows how far back consciousness relative to our memory banks goes. You know, if we have the ability to tap into the absolute, which is, I see it as, some people want to call it God, the universal intelligence, universal consciousness. Well, from my understanding is when we merge back in there at death, we take our memory with us. So there's memories that are just accumulated for our entire duration as a species that are available in the universal consciousness. So, right. So they're all there. So which one do you want to have next, right?
Right. So that is exactly very, very fascinating, because at a certain level in meditation, this will happen to many when they practice. Let's say after meditation, they find out they sit in a different way than they usually sit, or they talk in a different way. Well, let's say you currently have a male body, you go out of meditation, suddenly you have a feminine gesture, and then you are, in a sense, confused. Why did I just have a feminine gesture? Because you're not one person, you are an accumulation of the memory of hundreds of beings. So the interesting thing is that when we start actually have telepathic experience by communicating with our soul, the different parts of who we are surface in different circumstances when they are required. So in that sense, if I say who I was in a past life, that is a limitation. Why is this a limitation? Because there are so many me. At a certain point, we can speak plural. We can stop saying I. We can say we. Sometimes there's a we speaking. When I say I, then Julian is speaking. Maybe sometimes my deeper self is speaking, which is an accumulation of a way deeper memory, but we notice it as intuition. That's the interesting thing. We notice it as intuition as long as we don't have the capacity to actually decode the information in detail. Once we can decode the information in detail, then it's much more than intuition. It becomes ability. Yeah. Then we can consciously get in contact with it, with techniques, learn how to access it. And this is, for example, what Eckhart Tolle speaks about when he speaks about surrender. The moment the person realizes it cannot control or fix or repair a situation, and the person is so frustrated that it, let's say, drops all attempts, then the intuition, the deeper self, can take charge. And the deeper self has so much more memory and experience, will find an intelligent response that is way beyond the person.
Hey, you just brought up one of the questions from one of the people on the last video. Her name is, you want to answer it real quick, because it goes with just what you were talking about. Her name's Melanie Ann.
Yes.
This was what video was this? Forced versus voluntary slavery, is this humanity's fate? On December 2nd, 2018. She asks, address the fear of letting go and how to overcome that fear. I cannot emphasize enough how liberating it can be without judgment of oneself or others. So when we get to the place and we say, well, I'm going to let go of this fear, she wants to know, maybe expound on that. What practicality thing can you do?
Mm-hmm.
For instance, in a road rage situation where you become aware, in Eckhart's book, he talks about you become aware of, or maybe I got it from another book, that you're upset in traffic, and then all of a sudden you become aware of the thought that you're upset, and you see that as a meta view, and just sit with that for a moment. Suddenly it can be transmuted because you've had a meta awareness, and just the observation itself changes the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand what she's saying. So this fear of letting go, like if I let what I believe go, what do I have to replace it? Because this is what I see. As soon as they get the rug pulled out from them, underneath them, a belief that was stabilizing their lives or whatever, but they know it's not serving them, they want to replace it immediately with another one. So talk about that for Melanie Ann.
Right. So I would like to start with something also that Eckhart Tolle said, since you bring this up. He sometimes said at seminars when there are a lot of people sitting, he says, the people here have had enough suffering. So there are two ways of surrendering. One is through suffering. This is the unconscious way. This, in a sense, let's say when you are faced with an identity crisis. And one time I gave the example about a jazz pianist, for example, plays on a world-class level. Suddenly he gets an illness, he can't use his hands anymore. And suddenly the identity of the world-class pianist is dead in that moment. This is an identity crisis. Now, we keep being unconscious when we start replacing that identity with another identity. For example, now I'm the ill person. This is who I am now. Now I draw identity from being ill. So I stay in an unconscious state. Right? But then we, in a sense, exchange identities for identities for identities, and we will keep suffering until we let go of identity altogether, because the price of identity is suffering.
Okay.
Now, if we already...
let me interrupt you there. So you said we have to let go of identity.
Yes.
So do you just wad it up like a piece of paper and throw it in the trash with the word identity on it? I mean, this is a conceptual thing, and people don't know how to do this because you've had this, I'm what I do, I'm the grade I got, I'm the economic score that the credit company gives me, I'm all of those things, but how do they let go of that? And you have to replace it with something. In my opinion, they need to be connected to realizing not what I'm not, but who am I? And when they figure that out, that they're an eternal consciousness, and the memory goes with that, okay? So that you're just having an experience that you could relax and enjoy it a little bit instead of the fear of letting, oh, I'm this or I'm that. Why not just be a stopping point along your way and don't even worry about what you are? It's all about getting your experience and your lessons so that you, as a eternal being having a material experience, can move to the next level of experience, which may not be physical, right?
Well, the thing is, I think why people struggle, because in our Western world, we're so trained to rationalize everything. We have put a huge emphasis on intellect. We speak of Buddhism as an ism, as an ideology, right? We speak of Buddhism as a philosophy. We speak of Buddhism as Eastern thinking, because we are so identified with thinking, with educating ourselves, with learning concepts. And this is why so many people struggle, because in order to transcend identity, we need to practice practically. Yeah. So if we do not get into practice, it's kind of like this. You're sitting on a beach, you read a book about swimming techniques, you read 100 books about swimming techniques, and suddenly you get in the ocean, you find out you know nothing, right? But if you go into the ocean and you read the book about swimming techniques, you have an idea. So what is basically happening when people ask themselves, how can I surrender? How can I let go? That they try to do it with the mind. They're trying to solve it as if it is a problem, but it's not a problem. If I think I need to let go, I need to let go. I need to stop resisting. I need to do this. I'm still resisting because I'm thinking. See, it's a little bit like this. There was a beautiful metaphor that I saw from a Buddhist teacher in Thailand. He gave a cup as an example. And he said, let's say, if I use this cup And he said many people meditate by trying to hold the cup steady because they want to keep the water calm. But no matter how hard they concentrate, there's still a micro vibration, right? So the water still moves. And then at a certain point, he said, well, I just realized I had to let go of the cup. So he says, if I put the cup on the ground, suddenly the water calms down, right? But then we do the following thing in meditation. We're grabbing the cup and we're checking, is it calm now? Is it calm now? Is it calm now? Is it calm now? Because we're not letting go of mind. And the way to let go of mind is to shift your awareness back into your body.
Mm-hmm. Hey,
so
I wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of things. In this paper that I just gave you, and I know it's not fair to talk about it, so I won't, but there was a generalization made about hypnosis, transcendental meditation, and biofeedback. And I thought it was absolutely fascinating, the different perspectives on what needs to happen in order to get control of the process that changes your brainwave so you can be where you want to be. And in hypnosis, they had learned how to distract the left brain, the logical brain, in order to give commands to the sensory and motor cortex of the right brain, right? So, and actually that turns out to be somewhat similar in transcendental meditation in that you're trying to still the thinking mind, almost ignore it, let the water get still so that you have access to the higher functions of the right mind integrated with your energy body. And this part I wanted to talk about.
Yes.
It was absolutely fascinating, the idea of what physically could happen to you if you slow your processes down relative to standing waves in your lateral ventricles that are being caused by the cancellation of the bifurcation of your heart signals, things like that. So there's all this science they're discovering about the benefits of quieting yourself and meditating and finding this place. And the more of that you do, ultimately the hope is that you could get that energy in your system to travel all the way up to your crown chakra and transgress the corpus callosum so that both sides of the brain are reaching the same brain wave amplitude and frequency, and they call that hemisync. And one of the items that was in that document that I shared with you talked about a Zen master who'd been doing it for 20 years, a long time, but they were able to bring themselves to a state very quickly where they were hemi-syncing their mind and could hold that state for almost 15 minutes. And I want to say that modern mechanisms are available to use binaural beats and several other methods to change your brainwave state, so you can have a little assistance in this as an augmentation to learning to meditate and things like that. There are ways that you can tune in the radio station, get a sample of it, so you know that's where you're going. So you'll stay with the program, right? Whichever program you're with, whether it's yoga or Zen or just whatever. There's all kinds of different ways to find this place that is the real you, that's not the fake you that you thought it was, okay? And a lot of it has to do with ignoring your senses. That's the problem that's so slippery about this, is this consciousness that we're after is veiled. Otherwise, everybody would have it, right? It takes a little effort. It takes some focus.
That's right. And in a sense, in order to be determined about and have that focus, this is something when it comes to ego surrender, there needs to be a point where you come to the understanding that nothing in this world will give you continuous satisfaction. Once you've understood the law of impermanence, something happens, because the ego then realizes it is futile, to try to draw continuous satisfaction from this experience, because in that sense we can't hold on to anything. So once we let go of this world, because we know the satisfaction cannot be found in this world, we start transcending it. So this is letting go of control, stopping to try to attain anything here, to get anything here. So you spoke about those things in a very medical sense, but let's make it practical. So we spoke about that we live in a system of fear, right? In several podcasts where we made it clear that we are in societies where there is an emphasis on survival. And the interesting thing is that our rational mind is the main survival tool. That means the problem-solving tool. So we live in a world where this part of our brain is constantly stimulated, through TV, through media, and they tell you what to worry about politics, about economy, but basically they tell you keep your alert, fear, survival mind going. This is what's constantly happening.
Yeah.
So obviously the trick in Zen practices, and this is what I start teaching my students, is that I make it very clear, now we teach the body something else. And if I can teach my body something, I cannot be the body. So then, if I, for example, watch my thoughts, I drop my shoulders, I relax my jaw, I breathe deeply into the belly, what happens? I cannot have a fight or flight response. Yeah? Because what keeps this wheel of the rational mind going, thought creates emotion and emotion creates thought. There are two ways to break the cycle, to stop the perpetuation of energy. One is to stop thinking, and very few can do this. After you practice a lot of meditation, it's like having an off button, then we can turn off thought at any moment if we choose to. But if we're not there yet, it's very important to stop the emotional response in the body, so we stop responding to thought. And this is what Zen meditation is about. It's the foundation, so you can later do advanced forms of yoga. So practically it means, if I hold my body in a relaxed state, that means I don't react to a thought. I don't judge a thought, because if I judge a thought, my body will react as if it is a threat to me. So if there's a thought coming and I think, oh, this thought is bad, I have a fight or flight response. My muscles get tense, the breathing is blocked, the jaw gets hard. Mm-hmm. So in meditation, it's a very simple exercise. Sit, drop the shoulders, relax the jaw, do not create bodily tension, sit straight, so you do not express yourself as being a victim to your experience. Face everything straight up. And when we do this and we watch our breath, we teach our body not to respond to thought. Mm-hmm. So basically, we're teaching our body to hold an energy frequency. We're stopping the fluctuations, because every time we react to a thought, we create an emotion.
Yeah, you know what really works well for people with that kind of thing, mm-hmm. is doing exactly what you're saying, but having some visual or some sort of indicator that what they're doing is achieving the brainwave that they're attempting to. Mm-hmm. And one easy way to do it is to have an oscilloscope that monitors your brainwaves, and you can see them right there. It's kind of like, I have a little biofeedback device that has a little a galvanic sensor that goes around your hand. And basically, it's got a visual LED indicator and then an audible tone. And basically, it starts out red, and your job is to try to turn it green, okay? And there's no rules to it, okay? You just monitor your breathing, your posture, and it's almost autonomic in the sense that you can make it go from green to red, or from red to green, but you don't really know exactly how you did it. But you can be aware of suddenly, oh, I noticed when I sit up straight, or when I breathe more regularly, and my heartbeat slows down, and whatever it is, okay, you just play. All of a sudden you'll realize, wow, when I did that, I made the little bar go down, and you start to see this correlation between what you're doing, what you're thinking, how you're feeling, and what the real indication of what your processes are doing. So that feedback is really, and in this state, it's kind of different than transcendental meditation, where you're not trying to ignore the left brain so that the right brain can be accessible in this symbolic, holographic, more esoteric connection with your energy, where the left brain is judging that, right? Whereas in biofeedback, you're allowing the left brain to be involved in that, and then correspondingly communicating with the right brain, the sensor motor system, that this is what gets me to that frequency that I want. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of ways to do it, okay? You can, like you said, you could use hypnosis and block off the left brain and distract it. You could do like what meditation does, which is basically doesn't give any credence to the left mind, just shuts it off. And it's not, you can't do it forcibly. You have to do it essentially by focusing not with the brain, but onto a body function like breathing, where it's an autonomic system that you don't have to think or count or anything else that would cause thinking. Right. And you can cause that cup of water to settle down. Right. Okay. And after a while, you could do this sitting, standing, in lots of different positions. And the more awareness you have with your energetic surroundings, the quicker you can get into the state, generally,
Right.
what I found.
Well, there's something that for a lot of people frustrated by meditation that works surprisingly well. Many have an idea of right meditation, of correct meditation, and then the ego gets involved. They don't want to meditate in a correct manner. They start counting their breath. But when you just watch your breath without manipulating it, you just watch it. That's all you need to do. Just watch it. Let it breathe itself. We start gliding into the observer position rather quickly. But let's say what you said is powerful, because when you can measure a brain frequency, you can see when you reach a certain threshold, and then you have an indicator. The machine tells you, oh, you've reached that threshold. And then when you know, oh, that's this, you create a memory of it, and now your brain knows how to do it. So the interesting, right? So this is something that becomes very clear when we practice meditation for a while, when people have the first no-mind experience. And in Buddhist terms, that's samadhi, when really all thoughts stop. Then you have a memory of it, how you went in there. Yeah. And then you know, oh, it's a frequency. I just need to tune into that frequency. It's like you pull the button on the radio, and then suddenly you are in a stressful situation, and instead of reacting from memory, which would be unconscious, which would create karma, what you then do, you suddenly tune into that frequency. Yeah, you step out of the concept of past and future. Time disappears. The timeless you can emerge, and it makes the choices in harmony with everything that exists. So it doesn't create karma. It's effortless. This is what it is about. Once you find a frequency, you tune just into it. But for most people, they struggle to have that breakthrough experience because they try to make it happen.
Yeah,
it's
I want
to try to make it happen.
Well, so basically what we know, and I learned this quite a long time ago when I was looking at Krishnamurti's work and several others, is that we know what the brain waves are that are coincident with various experiences. Like they've categorized it into delta, which is the lowest frequency. It starts out at about a half hertz and goes to about 4 hertz or less. Okay. So it goes delta, theta, alpha, and beta. And beta is your waking consciousness that it varies from, I used to say 13 to 20 hertz. The article I gave you says 30 hertz and higher for waking consciousness, your brainwave frequency. Well, that's pretty scattered actually. When we know that in REM sleep, you actually are at a brainwave of about 3.5 to 4 hertz. You're in delta, the lowest region, when you have your deepest portion of your sleep cycle. Okay. So we also know that this is the shamanic experience, out-of-body experience. Many people have reported that in that frequency. So categorically, we know that if you can get to that place, you could experience that. Similar with the alpha state, which is it's around 7 hertz, okay, in that region. And it runs all the way up to about 13 hertz, which is what I call waking consciousness. Well, in the alpha state, we have attributes of heightened learning, awareness, focus. There's no ADHD in alpha, okay, and it should be no surprise to us that frequency, approximately where we're really tuned in, we're really focused, we're in the now, falls with the same frequency that the Earth is oscillating at, which is the Schumann resonance. So about 6.8 to 7.5 hertz. Yes, it seems to be reported that it's been changing. Okay, but generally it's calculated by taking the speed of light and divided by the circumference of the planet you're on, and that'll tell you the standing wave frequency at the surface. And you want to go deeper than that, okay, change the radius and you can come up with a different frequency that would be lower in the Earth. Okay, well, isn't that amazing that it falls right into the brainwave region that Robert Monroe talked about, the Monroe Institute, that if you calm yourself down to the frequency that was natural on the surface of the Earth, the Schumann resonance, 7.8 hertz, and you get your mind there, all of a sudden your hemisync processes start working, where your brain changes, all these terrific things start happening to the cerebral spinal fluid, and suddenly, if you go just a little bit farther beyond that, you're tapping into universal consciousness, and at that point, you don't really need to read a book anymore.
Right. That is the thing that is so profound, and I always say this. The principle of killing the Buddha, in a sense that you do not seek any authority over your consciousness external of you, because nobody else can wake you up. Nobody can do the work for you. Yeah, everyone in that sense is responsible to get on the path of awakening, of going through the process, of doing the work. And once we do, we become the source. And this is what we spoke about, I think, in our first podcast, when I started meditating, because I had the surrender experience. I suffered, and I realized nothing I could do would stop me from suffering. So in a sense, something in me surrendered. So then I went into the samadhi state, where in a sense you hold your mind steady and there's no thought. So once I fell into that, and I started writing about Zen. So suddenly, when I wrote about Zen, and after that I started reading The Power of Now, I realized Eckhart Tolle is writing about same principle as the information that I'm receiving when I'm sitting in meditation. So I realized, the source is universal.
Exactly.
And so in that moment, I realized no further reading in that sense is necessary. I still read a lot though.
Mm-hmm.
There are many techniques I practice, but from that moment, I realized source is within every single one of us. We are source. There is no divide. So we all can access those data banks of universal information once we let go. Once we, in a sense, stop trying to fight the current experience that we have, once we stop resisting it, judging it, battling it. Because every time we battle it, we're in survival mode. And when we're in survival mode, we cannot perceive a lot of the finer sensations, that means the frequencies, the vibrations that are in a sense very gentle, subtle. Our mind is too noisy. The external experience, the physical experience, is distracting us from those frequencies. And this is why sensory deprivation is so powerful, and sensory deprivation tanks. And even meditation is, in a sense, an attempt at sensory deprivation, because if you can ignore your senses, they don't distract you from other frequencies that you can receive, because the brain is a receiver and a transmitter.
That's actually, you bring up something really funny. I hope I'm not interrupting you. Did you ever see the movie called Altered States with William Hurt?
I didn't.
Oh my word. So it starts out, he's this professor he's a professor of anthropology, and he's looking into primal states of consciousness of mankind. So he's got an isolation tank, and he's suspending himself, and they're monitoring him and all this. Oh, I think you would really like it. It's quite a bit of an older movie. Actually, for some reason, that movie had a big effect on my seeking path in my spiritual path. It was like my cult classic movie for probably more than 15 years. I have no idea why. I've seen it probably 100 times. But that movie really did something to me about, maybe it just resonated that I was looking for my true self as well, my higher self. I think we all are. We're all kind of compelled this way, I think. And I think this is by design.
Of course.
Right? Hey,
of course.
I'm looking over some of these questions that people had to see if there's anything that jumps out at me. One thing that one of the guys asked, his name is Paul O'Donohue. Okay, he asked several questions. He wanted to know about the rules of the 3D matrix. Are they the same as the 7 Hermetic principles? I didn't see that one. It's really fair for you. He did ask.
Actually, he wrote me.
Okay.
Yeah. So Paul, right. So let me first say to Paul, apologies. I really, really loved your message. It was very detailed. It was beautifully written, and I really enjoyed reading it. I was simply very, very busy, so I didn't really come to answering it. But maybe right now, in parts, we couldn't answer it a little bit.
Yeah, he gave me kind of a 3-part question. he wanted to know some topics he had on his mind. Maybe we'll just do a couple of these. He wanted to know what the rules, and this is a very general question, the rules of the 3D game matrix are the same as the 7 Hermetic principles handed down by Thoth the Atlantean to all the esoteric priests and behind all the cult societies. And he says, take, for example, mentalism, all is mind, which Julian mentions in our social programming beliefs, which is used to get us all to manifest a particular 3D reality on behalf of our, I don't know, alien overlords. So I guess what he's saying is, what are the rules for this game if you want to be, I guess, an awake agent in the Matrix? Or I don't know exactly what he means, because if he's wanting out of the Matrix completely, what are the rules for that? I'm not so sure that is what we want, because we want to think of ascension as getting out of the bad situation, right? Where reality is victory is won in the battle, not from it. So you've got to do your part of whatever it is. So with that said, do you want to talk about the Hermetic principles relative to this, or do you think just in generalize about the rules of the 3D game? Because I think that's probably a good way to answer that.
Yeah, I'm not really familiar with the Hermetic principles, right? So I cannot really speak about that. What I can speak about, of course, is a Buddhist perspective. And when it comes to game rules, the Buddha laid them out. He spoke about it, and that he said this is the eightfold path of the Buddha, and it describes, in a sense, how to ascend from the matrix. And if we speak about how to ascend from the matrix, and this is not about escaping, because in Buddhism it will also be very clear, samsara, which we would call the matrix, is also nirvana. Why is that stated? We'll get into that, because it's not in a sense that you are trapped in the matrix. Is your perspective of the matrix. Your perspective, you believe about the matrix, creates a certain manifestation. If I know myself beyond the matrix, I can participate without feeling trapped in the matrix and without suffering. If I know myself beyond physical reality, beyond identity, then whatever happens to the person is a fictitious story within a space-time illusion, that has a history, that has karma. And understand, karma is memory on all levels. DNA, particles, molecules, everything has memory. So in a sense, if you draw identity from memory, you're trapped in the matrix. That is quite clear.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, but let me pose a scenario for you just real quick.
Yeah, can I still elaborate a little bit?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, go.
Yeah, just try to keep your question.
Let me make a note so I don't forget it.
All right. Okay.
Go ahead.
So let's speak about what is actually meant in a sense about ascending. Ascending is not about running away, escaping, because this is an egoic desire. I want to get away from pain. I want to get away from this experience. So you're in resistance to the experience. When you're in resistance to something, you cannot transcend it. So think about it a little bit like this. You have written a movie as a director, but now you give yourself amnesia about that you have written this movie, and you place yourself in the movie as an actor, but you don't know that you're acting it. You think it's real. Now, as a director, you have said there are certain game rules I said that I will put in place, otherwise it's not fun. I will hide myself from myself, but I give certain conditions, and when I understand them, then I will reveal myself to myself, right? So in a sense, you start playing the game and you learn about love, you learn about compassion, you learn about, say, many principles through the law of karma, until you realize, oh, as long as I hold on to identity, as long as I hold on to desire, as long as I want anything from this world, I cannot transcend it. So then through the law of karma, at a certain point, when you had a fulfilled experience in many incarnations, suddenly we're willing to let go of identity. And then we start waking up, but we can only wake up if we learn certain lessons about love and compassion and so on, and creativity. So in that sense, we have made those rules, so we're not a victim to those rules. I want to make this very clear. It is about playing this game, and through every rule, through every universal principle that we start understanding, a part of our consciousness is revealed. And you could say we step to one door, let's say our energy frequency rises, we go into the higher chakras, so our intelligence rises with each consciousness level. But each consciousness level, as you said, has certain tests. Yeah, do you prefer the material world over, for example, transcending universal knowledge?
Well,
What do you take?
This is what I want to pose to you. So now, this is great for what you're talking about. So Julian is now buzzing. He's walking down the street. He's in probably his throat chakra or his crown chakra, I don't know. And all of a sudden, the monetary system comes to an end, and Julian is told he's got to get a chip in his hand so that he can trade and buy food. What's the avatar Julian going to do at that point relative to his identity? Is he going to say, no, I'm a sovereign being and I'm not playing your matrix game? This is the kind of thing I want to hear you talk about just a little bit. Okay?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, the matrix only works if you respond to it. So if you respond with fear, you give it power. Okay,
so you're not afraid of getting chipped. You just say no. You see what I'm saying? Be
exactly.
Be kind of pragmatic with what you would do. What would Julian do?
Okay. So here's the thing. Julian knows something. Julian knows that he's just the surface. Yeah, and Julian knows he's much more than Julian. So the deeper me is willing to sacrifice Julian for truth.
So are you saying you would integrate yourself into whatever system comes and continue using the enemy's platform against them? Is that what you're saying? Are you taking a chip, Julian? That's what I want to know.
Of course not.
You're not. Okay, so if you're not doing that, then suppose that you're not allowed to travel or eat, but you can't buy anything. Now, what does that spiritual warrior do? Other than rely on the connection to the infinite that's going to make sure that the instance of itself is going to have a place to survive or not. And this is where the rubber meets the road, because this is happening to people.
All right. There's something that we can speak about, but I also need to be careful how much I say. This has not to do with keeping information from people. It has to do that if you have a certain information, but you're not ready for it, and you use certain techniques, it will cause harm. But I would say know yourself as the creator. So when in meditation, we enter samadhi and we can hold it. We can hold the no mind, and we can start doing Kundalini yoga. Yeah, and I told you before we started this session that someone told me about what happens when the fire reaches the top of the mountain, which is the crown chakra. So that means once you have a connection to source, once you have realized that connection, you can manifest a certain, let's say you can manifest in this simulator, yeah, through visualization. How that is done, I will not say, yeah, because I don't want those who cannot go beyond the ego, I don't want them to cause harm to themselves. And why that is the case? Well, if we start visualizing something and using a certain technique, yeah, if there is still shadow in us, if we haven't integrated ourselves completely, if there's still pain in us, something will enter that visualization and we will create it. So if we're not able to hold our mind steady, we cannot use certain techniques. And this is why in many traditions, certain techniques people are only initiated to if they're part of a school and have a certain level of consciousness. But I want to make this very clear that we can influence this experience not only through physical action, but that we can actually create thought forms that have a direct impact on what we call reality. So that means if we would, as a collective, and this is what I'm suggesting, if we visualize ideas of peace and love and creativity and compassion, and we do this daily, for example, in meditation, it will have an effect. But there are ways of amplifying it, and I want to be very clear about that. it's not advisable to do that if you haven't reached a certain level of yoga practice.
I agree. Yeah. Well, it kind of reminds me, and I'm going to let this one go. It kind of reminds me of when you're out of resources and out of a plan, that you have to rely on your connection to the universe more in those circumstances. And I think humanity as a species is being pushed to that point, almost like they're being pushed to the Faustian cliff, where they have to have these ego crises and then turn and start crawling back up the mountain, right? The mountain of universal consciousness. So, yeah, and for some people, that's going to mean not having a material experience at all and being homeless and living on the streets. Okay. For some people, it's going to mean something else. And whatever path you took down off the mountain is probably will be the one you're taking back up. So I would just say, you've got to be true to the intuition and the connection you have to your higher self, whatever circumstance you're in, even if it means you're put in the Coliseum with a group of lions. And that if that's your path, without fear, knowing that you're an eternal being, then I guess I would respond very differently now. I'm like you. I see myself not as a label or a box that I can be put into anything. I'm the possibility of possibilities at this moment right now, and that little window just keeps moving. And like you said, you could be what you need to be for anybody because of all the accumulated past lives and experiences you've had. So you show up for, the communicate. And that was the other question they had. I wanted to get to you, if you've still got any energy. I know we've been on for a while. Can you do one last question?
Sure.
Olivia Luke wants to know a little bit more of a strategy that you have on emotional balance. Okay, maybe it just comes as a byproduct of meditation. Talk to it. Emotional balance for her, Olivia.
Well, let's say at a certain point, this will happen in human evolution, but this is very far out for most people. At a certain point, we can completely stop to generate emotion. Yeah. This comes through continuous meditation practice. That means if I teach my body not to respond to thought or to any kind of stimulus, I stop generating emotion. Yeah. But for many, this as of yet is not possible. Yeah, because it is a process. Sometimes it might work. Sometimes you might fall back in a state because some memory is triggered, and that memory that we were unconscious about as of yet, right? We need the trigger to get conscious about it, so it's not a problem. Yeah. But let's say when we speak about emotional balance, there's often a bias that we think in terms of negative and positive emotion. There's emotions that we want, and there are emotions that we are rejecting. There is no such thing as negative emotion. That thought in itself is flawed. So once we understand that, it is about, at first, before we don't know how to stop generating emotion, it is about deeply getting into union with these emotions. Because any kind of emotion we are rejecting, we are suppressing, that energy is stuck in the system, in the energy field, and everything that is stuck will make us ill. That means we develop mental illness, physical illness. In order for that not to happen, it is of tremendous importance. Any kind of emotion will be felt in the body somewhere. It will be generated within the system. To shift our awareness away from the thinking deeply into that emotion and then drop all physical resistance to it. That means to let go of muscle tension. Yeah, to breathe into the stomach, because then the emotion will dissipate. It will not hit resistance, so as such, it cannot get stuck. So then, for example, usually when people feel triggered, they might have a very long emotion. Yeah. For example, grieving processes, we spoke about this once, because they're in resistance to the emotion. So the emotion cannot dissipate. Yeah. So then the emotion returns and returns and returns, and it hits a wall, and it keeps piling up and it keeps piling up. If you seek balance, it's important to remove that wall. That means there needs to be a willingness to feel completely, totally, right? And once we do this, we start transcending emotion, because the energy starts dissipating. And then, for example, the processes that we usually used to have when dealing with resistance. For example, someone leaves a relationship, someone dies, the loss of a job. Suddenly these grieving processes become tremendously short through this type of practice. And at a certain point, you cease to generate emotion altogether, right?
Mm.
Yeah, there might be some people who think right now, oh, I don't want to stop feeling, right? There is an attachment to feeling. The interesting thing is, even though if we don't feel human emotions through a lot of meditation practice, I can assure you there will still be a tremendous amount of love within you, and it will not discriminate. It will love completely without hindrance.
Right, right. That is a natural byproduct of stripping away the ego, because love is like a universal principle too. Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, one thing I would say to Olivia, and Kristen noticed this, is one thing that we didn't expect to have an impact on our emotional balance was simply paying attention to, I guess it's called Anuloma Viloma in yoga, where you basically, or they call it shining skull breath, right? Where you're alternate nostril breathing. We've been doing this for quite a while. It seems to calm down and balance your emotions, probably because of something with the Ida and Pingala, or the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system is very involved in the response process of a thought turning into an emotion, right? Once you accept the thought as your own, then it can get emotive qualities attached to it, because now it's got anchor weight in your system, right? You've allowed it in your memory, it's yours. So, and that's another process, you know, in terms of emotional balance. I think Eckhart Tolle had that right as well. If you can observe anything with a detached perspective, you can accept it and allow it to dissipate. You know, and that doesn't mean not to experience the full range of human emotion. I think that's required. I think the problem is people are afraid to do it because they'll get a label. Oh, that one's manic and that one's depressive and this one is schizophrenic. You know, you get the labels because so that you get your behavior gets put in a box that's acceptable.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is exactly that happens when we raise children as a society that has a certain software. There are certain emotions, and this is exactly the issue that we're speaking about. Certain emotions we label negative and certain emotions we label positive. See, to a child, all emotions are just that, emotions. They are. There is no bias, but we're teaching a bias to the child. We say, hey child, if you have this emotion, I don't like you. So we teach the child to suppress that emotion, right? And this is why people speak about emotional balance.
Is that how you do it in Germany?
This is how basically nearly every society does it.
I was just being funny. You know, Germans have a very strict education expectation for kids, just like Japan.
Yes,
right?
Yes, it's quite similar. That's very interesting because when it comes to let's say experience that I had with Japanese friends, it's very interesting because Germans and Japanese, they get friends very easily. Yeah, in some ways they're way different, but in some ways their software is similar. So suddenly they connect when it comes to the idea of discipline, of a certain idea of perfection. So they put a lot of pressure on themselves, right? And I think this is part of the Germans' World War II trauma. That energy, that karmic energy, is still within the system. It isn't fully integrated yet. Yeah.
Interesting.
So yeah, so once you, because think about it, after World War II, there was no psychotherapy treatment on a broad level. It didn't exist. People had to rebuild a nation, so emotions were just suppressed because of survival, right? And those energies were stuck. They were giving to their children, and their children would give it to their children. So basically, the energy keeps traveling. That's why every form of energy that you receive is never personal. See, the ego wants to make it personal, but in truth, the pain that we receive is thousands of years old, sometimes millions of years old. You can't even find its source anymore, right? But people try this. They try to blame it on something, because if we can blame it on something external, we can refuse responsibility, but we're all responsible. We have all played the game of karma collectively. So as such, your pain is my pain. Yeah. what the memory that you have that you cannot let go is my memory. So as such, this is the birth of compassion, to understand we're all in this. No one is exempt, and the decisions and the actions that we do today, they manifest the world that we see tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. And you know, if the manifestation was instant, I thought it and it happened, and you saw the results right in front of you, it might be more therapeutic for people to see that, because then they might believe that they're manifesting their own reality. But as long as there's a little delay, they don't believe it.
That's right.
Or it gets so complicated in the vignettes, or they don't see the life as a lesson ground, you know, a boot camp for consciousness. They don't see that, so they don't. So the lesson just keeps showing up in various forms for them. And so, what's on your list? Do you have any more issues that you receive from people or questions? I sent one to you by private message, and it was very heartfelt. I don't know if you still have it. It had to do with the gentleman who had the daughter who had some medical issues. Did you get that one? What do you think?
Right. Well, to speak, it was about a bipolar disorder, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Well, the thing is, of course, modern psychotherapy and psychiatry, we use a lot of diagnoses and labels. And of course, many of these doctors of psychotherapy, psychotherapists, they're developing systems of understanding. We've always developed systems of understanding. And having certain models can be tremendously helpful. But often when it comes to cases, let's say I have clients that contact me and they say, hey, can you deal with this diagnosis? Can you deal with that diagnosis? When a being walks through my door, I don't see a diagnosis. I see a highly complex being that has a lot of layers of energy. And to understand that is a process. And what has been spoken about in that message is about psychosis. And I'll be outright honest about that. In Western psychotherapy, very, very little is known about psychosis. Very, very little. And the medications that are being used are very crude. Yeah, and they have a lot of side effects. And let's say this is like something that is being used temporary in like the evolving science, because in the future when we find other ways of handling that energy, we probably won't use these medications anymore. But there is one thing that I would suggest. Psychotic states are highly energetic states. And often it has to do that someone highly sensitive is overwhelmed with information that they cannot process. Right? So for example, if someone would have a mystical experience, but they are still attached to the ego tries to process that information, tries to integrate it into the limited self-concept, and it can't. It gets mad by trying so, right? So it is very important when someone becomes psychotic to not make it a problem. And this sounds so counterintuitive, because everyone will say, oh, I feel helpless. I wanna, out of compassion, I wanna help my daughter or help my son. I wanna make them feel better. I understand this. But at the same time, it's important to allow, because if you're not in a state of allowance, you yourself are not calm. And someone who struggles with a mental illness, and I want to point out, I don't see mental illness actually as mental illnesses. Yeah,
Good for you.
Right? These are challenges that we take on, yeah, for our consciousness to develop. And sometimes we hit a hurdle and we have a crisis. Yeah, and people come into my office and they say, oh, it sucks to be such an old caterpillar. So bad to be such an old caterpillar, you know? So I would strongly recommend, when it comes to people who are psychotic, it's very important to not overwhelm them with stimulus. Yeah, to keep a very calm environment, to allow their psychotic episodes. Don't get in resistance to them. Don't try to talk them out of it. Don't fight it. Because when you try to talk it out of them and control it, it's actually your own fear that takes over. And when we act on fear, it's just going to generate more fear. The idea that we need to control illness and we need to fix it is the reason why illness persists.
I agree.
Right?
I agree. Very well said. And you know what? If there's any other questions that go deeper than that, I'll have you connect directly with that person, so it's not for a public thing. And that's why I didn't say his name or anything, but
Right.
I think that was very good advice. Thank you for doing that. I know that was kind of off the cuff. It was a last minute question that came in. So listen, I've had you on for almost an hour and 40 minutes. Do you want to say any closing words to the folks before we meet next time?
There's something I like to share, and this is what I like to share from the first mystical experience I had in this life.
Okay.
And this was 3 rules, universal law, that was explained to me, and that is very powerful once we allow it. So what I'm about to say, if you can accept that, you'll be open to different experience. And these 3 laws that I was told were as follows. Accept this world, it is exactly as it needs to be. This is law 1. Law 2 is there is no good or evil, there is just energy. And law 3 was, this is the stage on which we are allowed to try ourselves.
That last one, I don't quite get that. This is the stage that we what?
That we are allowed to try ourselves, experience ourselves.
Oh, okay, yeah. No, I think that's profound, and especially realizing that none of it is real, that the energy part is probably the most real part of it all. That we're a temporary incarnation of energy occupying a form, and then we're going to move on to the next thing. And actually, the understanding of that has made this process a little more relaxing. I don't feel so compelled that I have a bucket list that I have to complete before this experience is over. It's like, it's all as it should be, and I'm getting everything that I need. So I don't feel like I'm compelled or seeking as hard as I used to. I guess that would be one of the results. I've relaxed a lot more about the whole thing, and I don't take myself so seriously as much anymore.
Right. So. Well, and once you understand experience is infinite, experience never stops, why being anxious about stuffing so much experience in your life? Just experience the present moment. The present moment is infinite. It never stops.
Exactly.
There will never be a moment where you do not have an experience.
Yeah.
And everything you learn this life, even if you're old, even if you're close to physical death, and you say, oh, this doesn't make sense anymore, doing that doesn't make sense anymore because I'm old. Listen, you keep all of this memory. When you come back, you don't start at 0.
Well, see, that was another thing somebody had asked earlier, is when you come back, why is there such a disparity in memory when we get reincarnated? I think it's because, like you said, you keep that progression. So when you actually get to the place where you start, being a teenager, wherever your mental functions start working right, and you start waking up to who you are, you get a jump start if you've done things in the past life, or to move your soul path along something that's more permanent, right? So anything you do that deals with elevating your soul path, think of it from that standpoint. It's not wasted effort. It's not wasted at all.
Right. And there's actually evidence for that. Because if I have a client who starts practicing meditation, yes, they open their third eye and they do certain exercises, suddenly they find out, oh, they used to do a certain yoga technique. So then they start downloading the memory that they have of other lives. Yeah. Right. So there are some people, they start meditation, they get it instantly because they have practiced it in other experience, right? And then intuitively they just know. So in that sense, our deeper self becomes more and more sophisticated about breaking through the ego. So in every incarnation, you get better at breaking through the ego. Right? So in a sense, you might, when you get reborn, you get reconditioned, all right, but when you reach a certain stage, a certain age, for example, this happens with many, when they hit the age of 30 or around 30, suddenly they wake up. Happened to Eckhart Tolle, happened to other people I know, happened to me. So, so then that deeper self suddenly has the hardware, and then it springs into action.
It does, doesn't it?
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, hey, did we cover enough topics for today? I think it was really great. And next time, maybe I'll pin you down and we'll talk a little bit more about this synthesis of this document that I gave you with the lessons that you're learning, because you were talking about reopening your teaching modality, right? You're starting meditation classes and things just like you did 700 years ago, right? So now you're gonna need like a really nice Zen garden and a koi pond and all that stuff to go with it, right? Yeah.
In truth, I don't need a single thing, and this is why things fall into place.
Well, that's very profound what you said, because when you do realize that you're an agent of the creator of all, or this universal force, you're just kind of here to help, and that becomes your new mission, and you don't yearn for other external things. You don't need them. It's kind of weird. It's kind of like the term futant. Did you ever look up a term futant? Futant from Timothy Leary. He talks about them being terrible consumers. For this reason.
Right. This is super funny because there was a psychologist who did, I think, research with Zen Buddhist monks together. They would do brain scans and biofeedback. And he said, going with Zen monks to a mall is completely pointless. They don't need anything. Yeah, that was quite funny. Maybe one thing. I remember Alan Watts saying something about Chinese Taoism, and he said, "Well, when the Chinese say life is purposeless, it's a compliment." There's something that happened recently when one of my students, after a conversation that we had, he said, "Thank you, Julian, for the conversation," and then he adds, "I know I didn't have to say that. It wasn't necessary to say thank you." And then I said, "Well, the sky is not necessary. Trees are not necessary. Flowers are not necessary. All this beauty is not necessary, and it's still there."
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of that, it's funny you brought up Alan Watts. Look what Krista just.
Oh, beautiful.
I'm excited to read that.
Yeah,
he's an interesting dude. So for sure, kind of like you. And let's tell everybody goodbye and where they can reach you, and we'll just keep these going as long as we still have stuff to talk about. Whenever it's regular, okay, whenever it's natural for us. That's usually when we get together, right? So where can people find you and your book and things like that?
Well, you can contact through my website, which is julian-polzin.de. Yeah, there's my email address. The best way to correspond with me is with email. And I have an Instagram account where I share some let's say little Zen riddles. Yeah, if you want to know how to shift into an egoless state, though there are a lot of hints there. I recently started a YouTube channel where I share a little bit of my experiences, maybe for others to explore, to get curious. I hope I can inspire some. It's not necessary that I inspire, but it would be beautiful. And basically, it's very simple. Just Google my name, Julian Polzin, and then you will find the Instagram account. You'll find the YouTube account.
And they could get your book as PDF for free for a while, or you're going to make that go away with the new update? Or are they still able to get your PDF download for free?
Well, I still have a PDF version of my book on my website, but that is right now is not up to date. I will update it. But if you want, for example, a Kindle version or a written copy, you can find it on Amazon.
And those have your new updates in them so far? Oh, okay. Yeah, because I know you've been adding to the book, and I really appreciate the call out at the end of the book, by the way. So, all right, everybody. Well, this has been Gerald Clark with Julian Polzin, my good friend from the Mutterland in Germany, and we've had a really good conversation, and we'll catch up with you guys again next time.
All right.
Okay. Whoops. I meant to hit stop recording.